how do you practice tuning into that intuitive voice, the higher self, you said? Are there any specific habits or rituals that help you cultivate this interconnection?
Yes, I would say anything that puts you in a mindful or a receptive state. So for me, meditation is it. Like, that's the greatest way for me to connect with that voice and that inner knowing. But like, I also believe that people can do that when they're running, or when people have awesome ideas when they're running. And it's like being just fully in that flow state. So it's not just running, but it's being mindful while you're running. It's doing yoga. Some of my poems came through while I was in a yoga practice, and I stopped. And like, that's part of it too, is like following, like hearing it and being like, oh, I need to write this down. Yeah. So like, whatever, being in nature, whatever it is, it's finding ways to slow down. And I would say there's like 3 layers to just in general when it comes to connecting with intuition and trusting it. And I think the first thing is just being open and curious, and not, being so attached to certain beliefs. Because as I lived for a long time, I was attached to all these beliefs that other people taught me. And so you first have to be open. You have to be curious, or else you're not going to even let any of these ideas come through. And so first for me, it's having an open mind. You have to have an open mind first to allow new ideas to come through. You don't have to adopt them all. You don't have to take them in as your own, but you can sit with it and say, do I resonate with this? And then second are these lists of things, like whether it's meditation, whether it's yoga, finding ways to slow down, and it puts you in a receptive state. And that is where you actually get to receive the messages. One of my teachers, Dr. Wayne Dyer, says that when you're praying, you're talking to God. And when you are meditating, God is talking to you. And so to me, that is, I think God, the universe, inner higher self, it's all the same energy. It's all the same thing. And so it's finding ways to slow down. And then the next thing is actually taking action, because then you get to see that these things come full circle and they come to fruition. And something that you might have wrote down 3 years ago while you were journaling is another one of those things. But, I would write things down in my receivership, write it down, and then a year later, see how that exact thing came to fruition because I took action. So I think it is, the third part is important, because as you start taking action, the universe will start throwing you little nuggets like, yeah. It's exactly what you're supposed to do right now. You're exactly where you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, for anybody that's listening or has been listening to our podcast from the beginning to this point right now, if you're picking up on a concurrent theme of all of these amazing people, everyone's meditating. It is.
It's the way.
It's the way. No matter how resistant we may be from time to time or all the time, it is the way. So just thought I'd throw that little nugget out there.
Thank you. Yeah. I support this. I'm Garrett Brill, and I support this message.
It is a practice.
It is a practice. And I think that's another thing too. It's like, I am totally the person that said there's no way I will ever meditate. And I thought I couldn't. But as I got rid of these things that I knew, and there's a little whisper, and I think the whisper also, that's the overlapping thing too, is letting go of the things that don't serve you, because that is part one of all of it. You have to have the open mind, and I think if you don't start letting the things go, you don't have the space. And so you have to let things go. And then I was the person that said I would never meditate, and I could never meditate. I was always 5 steps ahead of everyone, thinking about every single thing that had to happen. And I still do that from time to time. But meditation, like, I started just saying, like, I'm going to do 3 days a week. And I did 3 days a week. And then 5 months later, I had stopped and hadn't done it for 2 months. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back to it. I'm going to try it again, until the day that I was like, this is my non-negotiable. I'm doing this every day. And essentially for about 4 straight years, that was actually a truth. Lately, I have been trying to reintegrate a new practice, and I'm working on some things, because I'm going to be honest, like, I hate when people are on podcasts and they're like, my morning routine is this. And it's like, yeah, it is, but can we be honest? It doesn't always work. For a long time was, and there's it flows.
It does.
It ebbs and flows.
And you can't be too hard on yourself.
Don't be so hard on yourself.
Exactly.
You're doing your best.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
that's
That
another
is-
lesson right there.
Absolutely.
Boom.
As a spoken word artist and creative, how does intuition play a role in your creative process?
I feel like that is the biggest part of it. It's being in receivership and then taking action on that, right? Like I was telling you, I mean, the children's book that you will talk about later came while I was doing yoga, and it just started. It was like screaming. It wasn't a whisper. It was like, this needs to be written down. And so I stopped. I listened to it. Said, you need to stop. You're great. You're doing yoga. You've been practicing every day for a while. Yeah. But right now, you need to step away and write this. And I honored that. And I wrote it down, and it came through me. Right. And so I believe that, creativity it's a receiver. It's a feminine energy. And you have to be in receivership to receive these, intuitions and these messages. And so... And I think that there is also a balance when it comes to creativity where there's discipline and then there's receivership. And sometimes some of my poetry came because every single day I was writing down 2 lines of poetry a day. And sometimes I hated it. I kept doing it. But then because I was doing that practice,
yes,
then poetry maybe every 3rd day would come through that really landed, but that was still in receivership because of the discipline that I had and the practice that I had. And so I would just say that if you want to continue creating and receiving the messages from wherever you believe these messages are coming from, you have to slow down and allow them to come into your receivership. And so I think that would be my answer to that.
I want to talk a little bit more about your poetry. It contains a lot of messaging, both of compassion and self-compassion. And sometimes people have a hard time being compassionate with themselves. I mean, I think we all do it from time to time. And compassionate with other people with different views. I mean, we see and experience that, I think, on a day-to-day. So where in your life did you learn compassion? And how do you apply that? Even when it's hard.
Yeah. Yes.
Even when it's hard.
I would say a lot of life has done that for me, but I would say the 2 biggest things I did talk about a little bit, but having the cleft lip, this is when I would walk into a room when I was younger, it would almost be like, when you walk into a party with a mask and when you first walk in, you realize you're wearing a mask, and you're like, oh, I'm wearing a mask. But as time goes on, you kind of forget your mask is on, right? So when I would walk into a room when I was younger, everything was through the lens of my cleft lip. So I would walk in and you could just picture being in my head and looking through my eyes. And I just thought about my lip. So I was perceiving and watching, and I really was in tune, which I think is a huge part of my awareness, because I was always just hyper aware of what people were thinking and what they were doing. And so
that's a trauma response, by the way.
Yeah. Exactly. And so that's the gift from that, right? Is my awareness, and just being that person automatically as I grew older and realized all of this, I can see how I can, everyone's going through something. And as soon as I tell people that story, every friend is like, oh my gosh, I had a burn on my arm when I had bacon burn on my arm because, and that's what my thing was. I was short, the color of my skin. Everyone has their own story, and we all go through that. Mine just happened to be the scar in the middle of my face, right? And so that's where a lot of my compassion came first. And then as I got older and I worked with these families, it was a very emotional job. And it was also very hard because the nurses that cared for them, which is who I provided, did not get paid. They get paid half the amount of money that they get paid in a hospital. So it was so difficult to find really great. And these kids were babies on ventilators that were 6 months old, and the parents needed someone by their side 24/7, whether it was them or someone else. So their lives were very stressful. And I would come to work having all of my societal, corporate, numbers I'm supposed to be hitting. I had just taken a 3 a.m. phone call from another family or a husband that was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, and I had to talk their wife off the ledge. You know, I'm like going through all this stuff, and then I'm having these conversations, and someone's like, even though they knew how much I cared, they would be like, you don't even care. And I would, at first, I was like, how could they think that? And I would get so sad and like didn't know what to do. And then I eventually took a step back, and I was like, I have never been in their shoes. Like, I am one of the closest people in their life, and they need someone to like unload. Like, they don't have, like, it's so much they were going through. And I started to just take a step back and be like, wow, like, people have so much going on in their life. Like, there was a family that, you know, the mother, yeah, like the mother had a 13-year-old and a 5-year-old, and the 5-year-old had severe cerebral palsy. And the 13-year-old tried to commit suicide one day. And I'm calling her, like, being like, oh my gosh, I found a Spanish-speaking nurse for you, and I'm so stoked. And that's the mess. That was how they received the call, was telling me that this just happened. So I switched my hats. Yeah. And it's like, I'm saying all this to just be like, you never know what people are going through. Absolutely. And like, I had to learn so much compassion. I had to learn how to truly listen deeply and not just try to be a business person. I was like so connected to these families, and I don't even know if I'm doing justice on explaining how the depth of like compassion I had to learn in this role, but that role gave me so much. And I was young, you know, I was running a business, and it wasn't just the families, it was then the nurses were in their homes for 40 to 168 hours a week. So they needed someone to talk to. My employees, we had like 100 and something employees, and they had to deal with this all the time, and they all needed someone to talk to. So I was the person for all of those people, you know,
and holding a lot.
I was holding a lot, and on my outside life didn't do anything. Like, my life was that was my life. It was literally 24/7.
Well, and you said that you were medicating yourself with alcohol, and
yes,
you were medicating yourself with fantasy football, and
yes,
just kind of numbing out, because it's just a whole lot of stuff to hold. So yeah, wow. What a transformation.
And I'm really grateful for Serafina, who happens to be behind us, because
Can you share who Serafina is?
Serafina is my love, and my fiance, and my wife, and my girlfriend, and my best friend, and my dance partner. All the things. But I feel like she's been a huge part of my awareness and my reflection, and, you know, being a person that, you know, questions and helps me question myself, and also like open to living outside the box. Because, you know, we've been together for 11 years. Actually, tomorrow is our 6-year anniversary of getting engaged.
Oh, wow.
We do things our way.
Yeah.
That's okay.
That's right.
And so
there's no like rules or like
I don't follow
rule
rules
book
anymore
for that. Yeah, you guys get to do whatever you want.
And so so she's been a huge part, because I feel like we have been partners in all of this, and like I think we've gone through a lot of transitions.
Sure.
A lot. And so we're ride or dies.
That's exciting. Yeah.
Well, we love you both, and having burned with you both, and just having been your friends, you know, being around you is quite inspiring and lovely. So whatever you decide to do in terms of getting married or whatever, if you want to do a Burning Man wedding, we'll be there.
Yep.
And to close out that last thought too, I mean, let's also say, love you, Serafina. And to close out that thought, to full circle, was, you know, when we would care for these families, there's some things we just couldn't do. Like it was a very difficult business, and sometimes families would unload. And I had one day I printed out a little affirmation, and this is like when I got into affirmations, and I put it by everyone's phone, because pretty much every day you had to let someone down massively. It felt massive, because it's just not enough people to take care of the people. Like, these families need and deserve so much, and they just don't get the care that they need from the state, which doesn't allow us to do our job fully. But you had to pretty much let someone down every single day in some capacity. And so on the by our phones, I printed this beautiful little affirmation that said, at the end of the day, I am at peace, because my intentions are good and my heart is pure. So that's the
love that.
self-compassion, right? So it's like we first had to learn to have compassion for them and then be like, okay, I'm doing my freaking best here. You know, at the end of the day, I'm at peace because my intentions are good and my heart is pure.
I love that.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that.